At first, I kind of hated this album. By the time I heard the entire album, though, I had cried twice and was just flat out in love with it. So what happened? Why is this album so divisive, and what took me from no to holy crap, yes? In June 2023, just about 2 months ago, Avenged Sevenfold released their latest album, Life Is But a Dream, the follow-up to 2016's The Stage. People genuinely don't seem to understand this album. Even like other musicians, like well-trained, very, very talented and skilled musicians. And I get it. I get why. It's a weird album. Clearly, I didn't get it at first either. This isn't a normal album, nor is it a normal production. If anything, it's more of a meditation than anything else, and we'll get back to that, probably. There are a number of gripes that people seem to have with this album, and we're going to go over them more or less individually. The genre hopping, the drugs and death stuff, the production/vocals, the philosophy behind the entire album itself. The very songwriting, arranging, and composition of this album is tied deeply into all of these. So let's talk about each of them to explore why people are having trouble getting this album and how I went from totally hating it to being flat out in love with it and it being in my top 3 Avenged Sevenfold albums. First, I want to talk about my personal experience with this album. Like I mentioned, I kind of hated it, and I really tried to like it, especially as I was going through the entire album. Like a lot of people, I was struggling to understand the choices they made from a songwriting and from a production level. In fact, this feeling stuck with me throughout more than half of the album, when it suddenly cracked during Beautiful Morning. It's the middle section of the song that starts with the song title, It's a Beautiful Morning. At that point, it started to become pretty clear to me that Avenged Sevenfold wasn't doing a standard album or album cycle in the music industry, and it definitely wasn't going through the same music production practices that you see everywhere, especially in metal. As the album continued on, those cracks just grew and grew and grew until finally I think I started to understand what they were doing and why. This is not an Avenged Sevenfold album. This is not an album made by M. Shadow, Zacky Vengeance, Sinister Gates, Johnny Christ, Brooks. It's an album just made by a bunch of dudes. A bunch of dudes named Matt, Brian, Zach, Brooks, Johnny, and Jimmy. Yeah, Jimmy. Jimmy's everywhere on this album. You can totally feel the rest of the band channeling him and channeling his vibe, and it's just awesome. It's super cool. There are 2 songs where I really hear Jimmy the most, especially on the tracks G and Life Is But a Dream. I'm just hearing Jimmy all over the place. And unsurprisingly, death plays a major role in this album. But it's not crazy overwhelming and talked about in the same overbearing way that it usually is. It's more embraced than anything else. I'm gonna fix this little chord right here. Oh no, where's it going? Okay. Just go in there. Like I said, by the time I finished the album, I had cried at least twice, and I just loved the thing just to death. It was one of my new favorite Avenged Sevenfold albums. The last song in particular just solidified it for me, cemented it. And it's not even really a song. It's a piece. It's a composition. If you listen to it, it's like has more in common with a Chopin nocturne than anything Avenged Sevenfold's done in the past. A lot of the tracks on this album are composed in that way. And that's really cool and kind of groundbreaking for metal as a whole. I began to feel like I understood what they wanted to write, and like I said, it's not really Avenged Sevenfold or an Avenged Sevenfold album. So to that end, why put it under Avenged Sevenfold? Why still use that name? Why not come up with a new name that maybe is more reflective of where these guys are in their life? Well, because I don't think they look at it like that. I don't think they see the name Avenged Sevenfold as a brand or an image of who they are or what they are in the rock and metal scene. Rather, it refers more to the group of kids that got together in middle school and high school, now adults, who just wanted to have fun, play some great music together. That's what Avenged Sevenfold means to them now. It's about who they are, about their family and their history. Honestly, the name itself is kind of superfluous, and it sort of always have been. If you go back to one of their early documentaries from the City of Evil era, they kind of say it outright, right there. They just took a bunch of names they found in like the Bible or something, and they all were just like, oh, that sounds cool. That's it. All right, so that's sort of my initial thoughts and experiences with the album. Now, let's talk about the production a little bit. Remember, I agreed with a lot of the things that people were saying when the singles were coming out, and that really changed. It forced me to change what I thought about the production once I heard the album in its entirety, and I'm not sure a lot of people are doing that, or taking that time to consider the album itself, how the composition, the instrumentation, and how the philosophy behind the album will affect its production. With that in mind, I'd argue that this isn't meant to be a modern production. It's not meant to be a modern progressive metal or regular metal production either. So those criticisms start to feel a little bit flat to me. I don't really get them as much anymore. You know what this is? This is a metal psychedelic record, you guys. We haven't heard one of these in a super long time, arguably since the beginning of metal itself. Black Sabbath was a psychedelic band first and foremost. There was no metal back then. We didn't have a name for it. It was just called heavy music or heavy rock or, psychedelic or acid rock. There's this idea in music production that the sound that we're going for, the result of our production, has to be this top quality, highly produced sound. And it's ironic to me that metal has developed into this line of thinking because metal is like super DIY and has psychedelic and punk roots. So it kind of goes against some of its main philosophies that it was born in. And it kind of sucks because that means a lot of metal these days and a lot of bands putting out metal music are kind of just trying to sound like the same few bands that have, over the course of the last decade or so, really honed and influenced the sound of metal. Particularly, I'd argue, the sound of gent has become the sound of metal as a whole. With the exception of like death metal and black metal and extreme metal, those sounds kind of haven't changed all that much in the last 10 to 20 years, and it's still much more DIY sounding than the rest of metal, and that's great. They're sticking to their roots. That's awesome. If you don't have highly processed or limited drums, vocals that aren't super compressed and tuned, dominating the mix like a pop record, or slamming rhythm guitars reaching out to freaking rip your ears off, most metal listeners just might not be interested. Hell, listen to the metal albums of the 1980s, and some of them might just be unlistenable to modern metal sensibilities. Why do you think all these classic metal songs and albums from that same time period are being remastered now? Because they weren't done well the first time when they stuck around in the mainstream metal culture for decades and decades? No, they weren't done well. We gotta redo them. Those engineers didn't do a great job. Looking at you, Bob Ludwig. Don't get me wrong, remastering does have its place, especially if you're mastering for vinyl or specific new media formats. And most of the time, aside from that, it's just about corporate greed. In my opinion, remastering is kind of akin to George Lucas going back into Star Wars and putting all these new things and new computer-generated stuff into the original trilogy. And then not being able to see the original trilogy. A lot of the time, these record companies are taking away the original masters and even the original mixes when they're doing remixing too, and you're not able to hear them anymore. You can't hear those original releases like the Star Wars because they now have these new remasters that sound better. Sure. What's really frustrating is that it's just a big screw you to all of the engineers that worked on those records. And worked on the Star Wars movies. All the VFX guys that worked on the Star Wars movies that literally won awards. Come on, Georgie. These albums and the original Star Wars movies, these resonated with the culture at large. So changing them and messing with them it brings up a really solid argument about who owns art in our culture. The artist, or when it's released, the public. Remember, Avenged Sevenfold started as a hardcore and a metalcore band, and there's a DIY element to that, a do-it-yourself element that they've always espoused and lived up to because of the punk roots of those genre. The whole idea is to not sound super produced and it's having rawness and energy in it is the whole point. It's part of the philosophy. That doesn't mean they weren't super into the production process and really intent on making sure they understood everything that was going on. They got so into this process and just literally impressed the record executives, the studio executives. They impressed them to such a degree that Avenged Sevenfold has been actually self-producing their albums since their 2007 album, The Self-Titled Boy. Since 2007, they've been self-producing their own work. I think maybe the decisions they're making on this album are intentional and well thought out and not just oopsies. I've heard from multiple reviewers now, how could the record executives, the mix and mastering engineer, how could all of these people let Avenged Sevenfold make these decisions? Well, maybe they're not missing anything. Maybe you guys are. Maybe you guys aren't getting it. This isn't a normal album, a normal metal album, nor a normal Avenged Sevenfold album. And it's being treated like that from a production standpoint. So should we. So, all right, that's what I have to say about the production. Let's talk about the vocals for a hot second, because I've heard some pretty annoying things, actually, coming out of people's mouths about Matt's vocal quality here. I don't know if these people understand that the dude literally had doctors tell him to his face that he will never sing again in any type of professional capacity. This was just a few years ago. Dude went back to basics, rehabbed his voice, and worked on it and did it right to the point of what we're hearing on the record. It's really, really clear as well that everything, every intonation, everything that's done vocally on the album was done intentionally. They weren't cutting corners because of where his voice was in this point or that point. Everything is done intentionally. You can hear it from Matt himself. Check it out. Roll the clip, future me.
Production-wise, it's all organic. We pride ourselves on... there's a lot of things that are in there, like where you could say, well, it was a vocoder. Well, it's a real vocoder. There's auto-tune, but it's hard auto-tune on purpose. There's no auto-tune when we're not trying to let you think there's auto-tune. There's organic drums. There's no drum samples unless we want a specific sample. So there's all these really organic things done in a futuristic way, I guess. So it sounds different than what most people are doing these days.
Everyone is entitled to their opinion. You can, of course, not like something, but you can't say that Matt doesn't know what he's doing and that the band doesn't know what they're doing. All right, let's talk about drugs and death. Knock it out of there. Let's talk about drugs and death. Life is But a Dream is a meditation on existence itself. This album is meant to help us reflect on a whole list. Give me a second. On our lives, on ourselves, our loved ones, our death, and the death of everything and everyone in existence. That's kind of a lot. It's meant to help reorient our perspective into something that might be a little bit more in line with nature, with a rooted humanity on Earth. What is that? What am I doing? All right, what the hell does that mean? Well, yeah, that's the whole point. That's why people aren't getting this album. This is heady shit. To understand this a little bit more, let's talk about drugs. During and after World War II, scientists and researchers were discovering and applying and experimenting with a bunch of mind-altering substances. Some of these, like lysergic acid diethylamide number 25, better known as LSD, these mind-altering substances like LSD and like MDMA were used by therapists in order to aid in treating people suffering from psychiatric distress, along with a bunch of other use cases that were like looking really, really powerful and like really, really good in terms of the results people were getting. One substance known as dimethyltryptamine, better known as DMT, was discovered to have extremely profound mind-altering properties. The curious bit about this substance is that it's found naturally occurring in plants, in animals, and in humans. And our brain is there right now for all of us. In fact, this is one of the chemicals produced by the human brain when it's dying. Whoa. Humans have ritually ingested DMT-based plant mixtures for literally thousands of years. We don't actually know how long, but if we're going to go by the histories and the depth of time from some of the last remaining hunter-gatherer tribes, particularly that we know of in Australia, like the Aborigines people, these cultures and these rituals could go back at least 40,000 years. Tens of thousands of years. I mean, I guess what else are we going to do in the Ice Age? Like perma-winter. Get really messed up on plants, I guess. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So why take this substance, DMT, when not dying? Well, clinicians are discovering even today powerful therapeutic benefits of ingesting it in a ritual or supervised setting. In more than one interview, Matt has admitted that he and the band have taken DMT in a controlled and ritualistic setting. Like the whole 9 yards, shaman included, like, and everything. Yeah, and each time you hear Matt bring this up in an interview, you can sort of hear the interviewer not know what to do with this information. But it's clearly really important because I don't think Matt would just volunteer that information in a press interview for their new album if it wasn't really important to the process or to the album and the music itself. Matt and the band clearly had their own profound experiences with DMT, and through those experiences found a holistic perspective for not just to make art, but to gain an understanding of life and death. To process that into their own individual psyches, and then use that growth and use that work and use the profundity of those experiences to create the art that they've always wanted to create. Hell if G ain't got some Pinkly Smooth vibes. Like, oh my God, it's just got all the Mr. Bungle 90s proggy weirdness in there. It's fantastic. This is part of the reason why I feel like Jimmy is so much closer to this record than any that they've done since Nightmare. He has to be in there because he's part of them. He's part of those group of dudes. It's not Avenged Sevenfold without Matt, Brian, Zachy, Johnny, Brooks, and Jimmy. Jimmy is still in Avenged Sevenfold through the rest of the band, through them, because they've done the work. They've sought out this reorientation and processed it into this album, which means we get to hear Jimmy and Jimmy playing music with them again. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you, guys. We all miss Jimmy. Thank you for doing this work and for letting us see him through your art again. It's beautiful. It's like all these reviewers are jumping on the hate bandwagon because it gets clicks. They're missing the forest for the fucking trees. And I get it. I get why. This stuff isn't easy to hear. Death is absolutely everywhere. We all experience it, and we all have to come to terms with it. When someone close to you dies, and I mean really close to you, that shit fucking changes you, man. Nat and the rest of the band, they felt that. And so have I. I lost my mom to cancer last year, and that shit is just a process, man. I'm still going through it, and I'm fucking doing the work. I'm in therapy every week. I'm engaged with my family. I'm making the art I feel like I need to make. I am trying. I am there. I am in it. I am living and moving forward, and it is hard. It's so easy to just want to shut yourself off during a time like this, and many people do, and I don't blame them. This shit sucks. You feel like you just want to disappear, and it feels right because part of you totally has when you lose someone that close to you. You lose part of your world. A lot of people fall into this trap. They shut themselves off to a degree and they just sit and try and cope with distraction after distraction. It's an easy thing to do in our society. But when you face it and you embrace it, you process the loss, process death itself, you come out with a more holistic understanding of life and what living truly means. Not only have Matt, Zach, Brian, and Johnny done this, done the work, been through this, but they've doubled down. I think the stage was a formative effort in trying to process and understand death and the world and existence. But it wasn't rooted in life. It was too broad, too big, too cosmic. It wasn't grounded. It wasn't rooted. There was little life and little death. Just eternity. Their experiences with DMT, the pandemic, lockdown, the war, I think that provided them with extra grounding that allowed this album to gain a holistic perspective that the stage wasn't able to achieve. Whew. All right, that was intense for me. Thank you for being there and for seeing me through that. Really appreciate. I don't know how much of that I'm going to keep, how much I like the me upset stuff. I really kind of dislike it when other people are really emotional in their videos, and it almost feels like it's a performance, but I struggled to get through that last bit, so thank you for being there. But I think, moving on from there, I think this is where the diversity in the genres and the genre hopping really comes into play. It's that with that holistic perspective. There was very little diversity instrumentally, genre-wise in the stage, but life is diverse and death is diverse, and I think it makes sense that the band would draw from any and all of their influences in order to make this type of artistic statement. This is high art, you guys. High art. This is also connected to, I think at least, why we have some of that intentional badness in the production, due to the philosophy of the record as a whole. The 21st century has seen the heavy metal genre become far more eclectic and versatile. Up until then, it really wasn't all that common to hear instruments and sounds and genres that weren't part of your typical metal band instrumentation. Drums, vocals, guitars, bass. That's it. Sure, there were some exceptions, like Metallica, especially their S&M concert, but that was the exception to the rule, and especially if it wasn't dealing with ballads or anything. But that started to change in the aughts. Even with Avenged Sevenfold's 2005 album City of Evil, my personal favorite, we had a beautifully composed symphonic interlude right in the center of Strength of the World. But it was just that. It was an interlude. It wasn't woven into the very fabric of the album. The 2010s saw this type of experimentation explode, with synthy pop metal bands and rap metal bands utilizing hip-hop elements and top 40 style melody and song structures. I'm talking about bands like Dead by April and Falling in Reverse. And this was really the first time that these genres were wholly integrated into the music itself, aside from being like a little interlude, a little kind of like catchy gimmick. With the exception of some bands like Limp Bizkit and other specific niches in nu metal who were like really experimenting and doing cool stuff. Limp Bizkit, I just said, System of a Down, Linkin Park. Yeah. In the progressive metal world, Meshuggah had pioneered an entire new genre called djent. And this goes all the way back to the 90s. Bands like Between the Buried and Me, Periphery, and Animals as Leaders were really spearheading that sound, combining djent with these ever-expanding genre-hopping interludes. Most of the time, these were rooted in jazz or some type of jazz fusion, but more and more you started to see some classical or composition type elements coming in, particularly in Periphery's later stuff. And yet these still just kind of remain gimmicks and interludes, fun little breaks from the really heavy, rhythmically intense music from the rest of the songs. Though I will say BT Bam, Between the Buried and Me, and Animals as Leaders were definitely starting to integrate everything closer and closer together, with newer bands like Aviations really just like going ham-fisted all out in a really cool way that arguably doesn't almost even sound like metal anymore, but it's freaking metal as hell. This is where Avenged Sevenfold comes in with their new album, essentially just integrating all of these genres into the fabric of the album and thus into the fabric and soul of the entire project. Life is But a Dream realizes and takes that next step that all these other bands were sort of just tiptoeing up to, and it makes sense why people don't like it. It's not really metal in a classic sense anymore, and that's kind of the point. Right now in the proggy, djenty metal world, it's kind of metal to not be metal anymore. To showcase how skillfully you can balance these desperate timbres and instrumentations and make them feel cohesive and like one solid piece of art, that's hard. That takes skill. I get it. It's kind of like the shredding of songwriting in a way. Personally, I find it hugely refreshing and super inspiring. Because until now, I was honestly getting kind of bored hearing the same sound for the same albums with the same really kind of generic song structures and even generic genre hopping interludes. All right, that's the genre hopping. We're done with that. Let's move on to the next thing now. And I think this will be the last thing we talk about. Finally, let's talk about the philosophy of art that this album is rooted in. Life isn't pretty, and death sure as hell isn't pretty either. I don't think Avenged Sevenfold is interested in putting out the kind of highly processed and clinical and produced music that maybe they once were in the past and that most people in the metal scene these days are into. And that feels really validating for me because I really don't want to make that type of music either. I haven't felt this much motivation and inspiration for the metal scene, to be part of the metal scene, to write metal music for a really long time because I was getting bored. Everyone was trying to sound the same. Everything was in a drop tuning. Even fun djenty bands, like it all started to sound the same. We get it. Odd time signatures, syncopation. We're in 4/4 but not in 4/4. We get it. It stops being fun after a while. And that's just metal. Let's not talk about the rest of popular music these days. And I have my own opinions on that. I think that's why I found myself more drawn to the classical world in recent years, which is why most of my content was really like kind of focused in the classical and composition world. Because for me, the music you compose is about you as an artist. It's yours. It's not about what anyone else thinks or anyone else's ideas. And the classical world itself is just so broken, and believe me, the music industry as a whole is following suit. I see no point in trying to be a great composer. So I, say it with me, just write music. It's not until recently that I've started to see artists of all stripes, metal or not, say, fuck it, I'ma do me. But artists have also been doing that for ages. We only hear about the ones that don't and get really, really, really popular. My season of life has come back around, and this album found me at the right time. That much, even this soon after its release, is clear to me. This is where Avenged Sevenfold is coming from. They're calling it as they see it, and they're not making or taking any compromises that is going to affect the vision for their project, for this album, for their music, especially not to record labels or studio executives. In a way, we have the current state of the music industry to thank for this. In a world where there's no money to be made in record sales, in touring, streaming, and even merch, artists find themselves stuck between two positions. Either make the most generic, broadly appealing music possible, or dig deep, find out what makes them tick as artists and musicians, latch onto it, and execute it without compromise. If the chance of making a good living in music is kind of null anyway, why not make exactly the kind of music you want to make? Why not do exactly what you want in your music? Avenged Sevenfold, Brian, Matt, Zachy, Johnny, Jimmy, and Brooks, they chose the latter. And goddammit, I'm crazy glad they did. Because the fact that it's Avenged Sevenfold doing this, perhaps the last metal band to truly break out into the mainstream, is huge. it screams volumes. So that's my take on Avenged Sevenfold's new album, Life is But a Dream. Thank you so much for making it this far. I said words. I'm out of it right now. This was a long one. Longest I've done in a very long time. Let me know your take in the comments below. Let's get a discussion going. Do you disagree with me? Come at me. Come at me, bro. Let's go. For all of you rock and metal guitarists who finally want to make the leap into writing your favorite genre and improvising in your favorite genres, I've got something really, really awesome coming down the pipeline that is literally just for you. No one else. No, if you're not playing rock and you're not playing metal and you're not a guitarist, this isn't for you. I am really, really excited about this, and I want you to be the first person to know about it when I announce. So in order to make that happen, you just go on down to the doobly-doo and check out my free guide, The 3-Step Song Starter. Not only will that give you a head start on making your own music and making your own songs, it's also going to ensure that you're the first person to hear when this awesome new fun project is available the very minute it is. Thanks so much for watching and for hanging out with me today. I'm Avi, and don't forget to be awesome.